Okay, we all ready to get started? Can I answer any questions for you before we do? All right. When we left off on Tuesday, we had started talking about views in Rails. Right? Basically, what we found out so far is that there is a method to the madness in how the view files are named. Right? The names themselves are very formulaic. Right? The first part of the name being basically the name of the view itself, the second part being the type of data that it's going to present, the third part being the engine that's going to be used to produce that information. Right? We found out that there is a relationship between the URLs that we type in and the actual views that we end up having returned back to us again. Right? So for example, if I go over and actually start up my Rails server on the command line, I'm just going to type Rails S. Oh, wait a minute. I already have a Rails server going. If I try and start my Rails server here, I'm going to get an error. Yeah, see? Because I have a Rails server going already, which means port 3000 is already in use. I could go ahead and start the server up on a different port, like port 3001, Rails S-P 3001. That way I can have both servers going at the same time. So if I do go ahead and start up my server there, if I jump over to my browser, go to localhost port 3001, which is where I just started this server. If I go to examples/index, I end up getting a page returned back to me. Right? The content of that page then, we can track down basically just by looking at the URL, /examples/index. Okay? In the actual files of my project corresponds in a way to sort of two different things. For one thing, it corresponds to the fact that I have a controller called examples. So that's the first part of the URL there, examples. There it is. The second thing then is inside that examples controller there's a method called index, which is getting executed, right? But for the moment we're trying to generally ignore controllers, so I'll skip over that. Okay? The other thing that happens when we go to /examples/index is under the views folder there is an examples subfolder, right, which is the first part of that path, examples. And inside there, there is an index action, an index template, it would be called. Right? So it's that template that actually gets rendered and returned back to the browser when I go to that particular path. I have some other templates in here. For example, I've got one called factors that's inside a math folder under views, which generally means that if I go to math/factors, okay, I'll pull that page up. Okay. The actual factors page is this one right here that generates the actual table that we're seeing there as the content of that page. Okay. But we found out towards the end of class last time that there's actually a little bit more than that going on, because not only do we have this template that produces the content for the page, but we also have this file called a layout. My layout file is under the layouts folder under views. Right? And my layout file here is actually called application.html.erb. And what the application HTML.erb layout file basically does for me is it puts in everything that's going to be common to all of my templates. So essentially any page I go to, whatever page I happen to go to, things that I want all of those pages to have in common, I can put into this layout file. So I did things like put in a little bit of navigation, a little unordered list there with a couple of hyperlinks in it. I put a little CSS up in the head section. Right? And what happens as a result is that when I go to the other pages, like when I go to the factors page, when I go to the multiplication page, both of those two templates essentially just fill in data into the layout file. Right? So in the layout file, there's a point where we call yield. And that is the point where the content from the template will be filled in. So when I go to the factors page, the application layout is fundamentally what I get, but in place of the yield, it fills in whatever the factors template says to fill in. When I go to the multiplication page, the application layout is fundamentally what I get, but in place of the yield, I get the content that the multiplication template says to put in. So in Rails, when we're talking about HTML views, usually every view is kind of made up of at least these two parts. The layout providing sort of the basic common structure for the page, and then the template that fills in the specifics, the actual content in the body, a lot of times. The big benefit of this is that it makes it real easy for me to update in my entire website all at once from a single file if I wanted to. If I wanted to, for example, set up my factors and my multiplication pages so that they were a, say, a fixed width layout, instead of having to go and edit two different pages to change both of them to be a fixed width layout, I could just go to my application layout file and make whatever changes I wanted to make to it there. For example, maybe I will put in a div with an ID of content. I'll make sure that my navigation and the yield fall inside that div. Then in my CSS, still in the layout file, I'll say for the div called content, I'll say set its width to 800 pixels, set its margin to 0 top and bottom, auto left and right. Seems like I forgot something. What did I forget? Is my screen only 800 pixels wide? I thought it was wider than that. Let me do this. Let me put a border around the content. Yeah, that's basically it. My screen is just not wide enough to really get much of an effect of the fact that that's a fixed width layout. Maybe instead of 800 pixels, let me set it to 600. There we go. I'm going to take that red border back out. So now both of my pages, factors and multiplication, are both fixed width layouts. Right? Kind of everything set in a fixed width column down the center of the page. And I changed both those pages, right, just by making changes to the layout file, right? Because generally anything I do to the layout file is going to affect every view, every template. At least most of the time, at least by default. There is the possibility that there might be times when there are certain pages or groups of pages that I want to behave differently. Maybe I want them to look differently than other pages on the site. For example, if I go back over to examples index, you notice that it is also picking up all the changes from my application layout. The navigation I put up at the top with factors and multiplication links, right? The CSS that's affecting the table, the fact that it's a fixed width page, even though I had never really intended for that to happen. All of those changes I made to my application layout affected the index page under the examples controller the same way it was affecting the math stuff. Really, I had only intended those changes to affect the math stuff. So is there a way that I could have separate layout files for those different groups of pages? Could I, for example, have one layout page for math and another layout page for examples? One layout page for all the templates that are in the math group, another one for all of them that are in the examples group? Yes, that is possible. Right? There's kind of a hierarchy that Rails goes through whenever it's rendering a view and using a layout. What happens is when Rails goes to render a view, basically to return a rendered page back to the user, the first thing it does is it looks inside the controller itself to see if there's a specific instruction that says what layout file to use. There's a layout method that later we'll be able to include in our controllers where we can specify, use this layout. Don't just guess, I'm telling you, use this layout. Okay? If Rails doesn't find a specific instruction in the controller telling it which layout file to use, the next thing it then does is it looks in the layouts folder, and what it looks for is a layout file whose name matches the controller. Right? So if I was rendering a math page, it would look for a layout called math. If I was rendering an examples page, it would look for a layout called examples. Right? If it finds one that's specific, it'll use it. Right? Finally, as a third step, if it isn't told by the controller specifically what layout to use, if it doesn't find a layout whose name matches the name of the controller, then the last thing it does is it looks for application. If it finds a layout file called application, then that's sort of always its fallback. That's the one that'll be used anytime there isn't anything more specific given. Okay. So if, for example, this layout that I've put together, I wanted to be used specifically for the math pages, but not for anything else, what I could do is I could rename that file. Instead of calling it application, I could call it math.html.erb. So rename application HTML.erb to math HTML.erb. And at that point, essentially what we're doing just by changing that file's name is we're telling Rails that that layout file is a layout file that's only meant specifically for templates in the math directory, in the math folder, in the math group, however you want to think of it. So if I come back over, let's say I go to my factors page. My factors page, my multiplication page, they're exactly like they were before. I don't see any difference. Bless you. But if I go to examples index, bless you, that one is very different. You can see examples index is now not picking up those changes that I made for my math pages at all. They're not getting the green coloring for the table the way the math page was. They're not getting the math page specific navigation up at the top. For that matter, they're not really probably getting a whole lot at all. Let's see. I was thinking I had a way in here to view the source of the page that would let you see it a little bit better than the way I was doing it last time. But if I have it, I don't remember what it's called. I'll have to track that down again. Right? Anyway, for now, okay, if I actually look at the source code for this page, for the examples index page, it's in the middle column there in that bottom section. You notice that it's not even a real HTML page anymore. There's no doc type at the top. There's no HTML tags. There's no head section. There's no body section. Right? It's nothing but an H1, some paragraphs, and a table. Right? All of the normal structure of an HTML file are not showing up on this page anymore at this point. Because what's happening now is when I go to examples index, right, Rails goes to the examples controller, which doesn't tell it which layout to use. So it goes to the layouts folder and looks for a layout file called examples, HTML or ERB. When it doesn't find that, it looks for a file called application, HTML ERB, and it doesn't find that either. At that point, when Rails has exhausted all three of those possibilities, it doesn't know what to do for a layout, so all it does is just execute the template. So all we get returned back to the browser is just the content from the template, without all of the extra stuff around it that a layout typically provides, which I don't want. Right? This page is very invalid at this point. Okay. So how about if I go to my layouts file, my layouts folder. Okay. I'm going to create a new file in there. I'll call it application HTML ERB. Application.html ERB. There we go. I'll create this basically as just a regular old HTML5 page. I'll set the title to example page. And maybe down here in the body what I'll do is I'll just call yield. With this page now in place, if I go over and run the examples index page again, Rails will look in the controller, won't find any instructions about layouts. It'll go to the layouts folder looking for examples HTML ERB, won't find that. So it should then at that point fall back and use this instead. And if I pull that up in my browser, right, the title up at the top, you'll notice, got set to example page. Example page is what I told it to set as the title. So at that point, it obviously appears to be using the application layout file. What do you think? Do you kind of get a sense of how those parts fit together? Super. Okay. Do you have any questions? Okay then. One problem that you can occasionally run into, the way that these different pieces fit together, is what happens if you want to somehow affect the layout from within the template. Right? Now remember, the layout is sort of the big picture. The template is the part that gets inserted into the layout. Right? We can do things to the layout, like put in CSS, that will definitely have an effect on the template when it's put in. But is there any way that we can have something in the template itself affect the layout that's outside, that's around it? Okay? An example of this might be setting the page title. Right now, in my math layout file, the page title is set to Views Example. If I go to my Factors page, you can see the title up on the title bar is Views Example. If I go to the multiplication page, the title is Views Example. Right? Both pages are showing the same title because the title is set in the math layout, the general framework for a math page. Okay? But it's the content in the template, like in the multiplication and the factors templates, where I would like to be able to say the title isn't Views Example, the title is Factors of 10 or Multiplication Table, something like that. So can we, from the template side, send data back out to the view, back out to the layout? Right? And the answer is yes. The way we can do that is by using the yield again. Right? Yield in the layout with no name after it, just a general yield, basically tells Rails where to inject the template itself. But in the layout, we can also put in yields that are more specific. I'm trying to remember, do we need processing or output ERB tags? I'm going to say output. Is that what they used before? Yeah. So for example, here in the math template, if I say yield title, yield and then the symbol title, okay? What I could then do is from within the actual templates themselves, I could specify what data I want for the title. So over in the multiplication table, for example, if I wanted to set a specific title from the multiplication table page template, I could do that using a method called content_for. I could say content_for title, give it a block. Whatever value the block possesses or returns is what we'll actually get when we yield to it. So I could say multiplication table. Now in the browser, if I go to the multiplication page, the title up at the top is now views example hyphen multiplication table. So there's the value that I put in. If I go to factors right now, it's just views example hyphen. But if I go to the factors template and I say content_for title, give it a block, and I tell it the title I want is factors of 10. If I take another look in the browser, now the title up at the top is views example hyphen factors of 10. Kind of following through what's happening there. Okay? In the browser, I say go to math/factors. Okay? That request goes into Rail, parsed by the router. Okay? Rails figures out that math is the name of a controller, factors is the name of an action view combination. Okay? So it goes to the math controller, executes the index action, or I'm sorry, the factors action, which we're ignoring for the moment. Okay? It also then comes down to the views and says, okay, I know I've got to render a view for a math page called factors. Both of those things are there in the URL, math and factors. Okay? Since the first part is math, it has to go find the layout. And it finds a layout file called math.html.erb. When it starts running this template, it sees this spot in here where we say yield the title. Okay? Essentially what it does at that point is it goes over to the template, factors, and says, is there something here where they say what that title's supposed to be? Yep, sure enough there is. This content_for block right here is for title. So it goes ahead and runs that block. That block outputs factors of 10. So that's what it ends up being put in, injected with these output ERB tags right here. So the title becomes views example hyphen factors of 10. It goes on through, does all these other lines until it gets to the yield down in the body that doesn't say specifically what to yield. It's just a general yield. At that point it comes over and it runs the rest of the factors page. The rest of the factors template. Generates all the output from it and sticks it right back in place of that general yield down in the body. Fun stuff. Okay. Questions? Okay. Let's throw something else together here, just for practice. You know, we're buried up in our necks to this math stuff. Let's start something fresh. Let's say we wanted to create a series of, let's say, 4 pages that were meant to show 4 different products we sell. Right? Normally what we would do is we would set up a database table. We would store all the information about all those products in that table. Right? But if we were then going to do that, we would need to get into the controllers and, like I said, trying to ignore the controllers for a second and just concentrate on the views. So for right now, let's put it together in a very unrealistic way. Right? But it'll be good view practice. What I want to do is I basically want to create, let's say, a products controller that has a specific action in it for all 4 of the products that I want to sell, that I want to create pages for. So on the command line, I'm going to say Rails G. I'm going to tell it I want to create a controller. I'm going to call the controller products. And what should our 4 products be? Let's say we're going to sell a laptop, so I'll put that in. Let's say we're going to sell a coffee cup, so I'll put that in. Say we're going to sell some dirt, I'll put that in. And for our 4th product, we will sell happiness. Is it a Y or an I? It is I? Happiness? Okay. So those are going to be the 4 things I sell. When I run this generator, right, it's going to create a new controller called products. That's what the products part is. And then the 4 things after that are me telling it the 4 actions that I want that controller to have. Like I said, I can't stress enough that in the long run, this is not the way this would be done. This is just something to give us a little more practice playing with views. All right. When I hit enter, it's going to create the controller file for me. It also goes ahead and creates template files for those 4 things that I asked for. Right? So it created my products controller up there in the products folder. Under views, it made a new products subfolder. And in there, it created a view file for each one of the 4 things I asked it to create. So I've got my coffee cup, my dirt, my happiness, and my laptop. Okay. Each one of those has a little bit of sort of default text in it. Nothing too fancy, but enough that we can tell them apart from one another. Let me shut down a few of my other pages here. There we go. All right. In my browser, if I wanted to say get to the laptop page, I could go to localhost in the port that I'm using. I could go to products/laptop, and I get to my laptop page. If I go to products/happiness, I get my happiness page. With me so far? Okay. Let's say that I wanted to apply a little design to these 4 product pages. Okay? Instead of having to change the design of each one of them individually, I should be able to affect the design of all of them through the use of a layout file. If the design I want to use for my products is different than the design for everything else in my site, then instead of using the application layout file, which would affect everything that doesn't already have a specific layout file, I could create a new file specifically for products. Okay. I would do that by making a new file and calling it products HTML ERB. If the name of the layout matches the name of the controller, the name of the group of actions, then it will be used preferentially to the application file. So if I make this, it'll be used instead of the application layout that everybody else uses. There we go. I can start off a basic page. Maybe for the title, what I want to do is I want to be able to put in the specific name of the product. Because the product's layout file is generic, though, will be used for all 4 products. I don't know what product I could type in there at this point. But what I could do is I could say yield to the title. And that way the individual templates, the coffee cup, the dirt, the happiness, the laptop, could put their own title in themselves. Maybe I want to do a little CSS. I'll just embed it here in the head section. Don't worry, we will talk about the external CSS stuff here before too much longer. I'm going to say in the body of my page, let's set the background color to a very light gray. I'll say that I'm going to have something with an ID of content. I'm going to set that thing's width 500 pixels. Set the margin to 0 in auto. That actual content div is something I'll put down in the body. So a minimal little amount of styling there. Down in the body itself, inside that content div, is where I want the individual product content to show up. So it's in there that I will say yield. Basically, that's where the template goes. So that's where the coffee cup or the laptop or the dirt or the happiness will appear. Let me give that a try and see how that goes. If I jump back up over the browser, I'm on the happiness page, /product/happiness right now. If I refresh, it's almost what I wanted. The one thing I forgot is I'm going to take the content section and I'm going to set its background to white. Probably ought to give it some padding too. There, that's what I was looking for. So if I go to happiness, I get this. If I go to laptop, if I go to dirt, so I basically styled all 4 of those product pages just by creating a layout file for them and editing that layout file. Nice templating system. Makes that kind of thing real easy to do. Right now, whenever I go to any of those pages, do you see the title up at the top of the browser? It's just the URL. Essentially what happened was in my layout file I said that we would yield a title, but I haven't actually yielded a title. So it's just using the URL instead. Right? At this point, I could go to each one of the individual templates, like my coffee cup template. And I could do something like, say, content for title, do. And for coffee cup, I'll set the title to coffee cup. On my dirt page, I'll do content for title, set the title to dirt. On the happiness page, same thing, set the title to happiness. Laptop page, set the title to laptop. Now in my browser, if I go to the dirt page, I get the title of dirt up at the top. If I go to the laptop page, it's laptop. If I go to the happiness page, it's happiness. So my titles are getting set just fine. Okay. I think the next thing we need to tackle then is navigation. Right now I'm getting back and forth from one page to another just by typing in the URL itself. That wouldn't work for most people. It would be pretty easy to put in sort of a standard hyperlink-based navigation. Just create a little list, make a handful of hyperlinks that go to each one of my different products, but I don't want to do it that way. Given my eclectic set of products that I'm selling, I also want to have a different way of navigating between them. What I want is I want it to be very linear. Let's say that my home page would basically be the coffee cup page. And then from coffee cup, I want there to be a link that you can click to go to get to dirt. From dirt, you can then go to happiness. From happiness, you can then get to laptop. Right? And then I want to also at each page to have a link that'll let you go back. So coffee cup can take you to dirt. Dirt can take you back to coffee cup or forward to happiness. Happiness, you can go back to dirt or forward to laptop. Laptop, you can only go back to happiness. I picked that order just because that's the order my tabs are open in my editor, by the way. Coffee cup, dirt, happiness, laptop. Okay? So kind of like having a forward and a backward link on every page, essentially, is what I want. So how could I do that? Well, on the coffee cup page, I could put in a hyperlink that will take me to the dirt page. Like that. Maybe I'll put an arrow in there too. Right arrow. On my dirt page, let me put in a hyperlink that'll take me back to coffee cup. And another hyperlink that will take me forward to happiness. Before I do any of the others, I want to go to the browser and take a look. All right, let me start at the coffee cup page. There's my link that takes me to Dirt. If I click it, I go to Dirt, where I then have links that go back to Coffee Cup or forward to Happiness. If I go forward to Happiness, I haven't put any links on it yet. If I click the Coffee Cup link, that takes me back to Coffee Cup. So that looks like it's working. I don't like the design of it, though. I don't like the style. I would like to have them more separated. Basically, the back link I would like to have sort of in the lower left corner. The forward link I want over in the lower right corner. So like on the Dirt page, I want Happiness way over to the right. Now I could do that with a little bit of CSS, right? On the Dirt page, maybe I could take and put the Happiness link inside a span. I'll give the span the ID of forward link. Back over in my layout file where I have my other CSS, maybe I'll say anything with an ID of forward link, I'll float to the right. There we go. And that's what it ends up looking like in the browser. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay. Back to Coffee Cup. Nope. Dirt needs to be a forward link, doesn't it? On the Coffee Cup page, Dirt should be a forward link. So I need to take the Dirt link on the Coffee Cup page, put it in a span, give it an ID of forward link. There we go. That's where it's supposed to go. Forward to Dirt, back to Coffee Cup. What do you think of the solution? You're used to doing things sort of the HTML way. This isn't that bad. Okay. But overall, I'm not crazy about having to go in and style every one of those forward links. When I do the Happiness page, I'll need to make sure that I put in a special span for forward link, for the link that'll take me to laptop. Okay. If I wanted to do any other CSS to it, there might be additional styling that I'd have to go through and do every product. Right now we only have 4 products, but if later we have 8 or 16 or 32, all this editing of these links is going to become that much more obnoxious. Is there any way we could maybe use Rails' templating system, the way the layouts and the templates all fit together, to maybe make this a little bit easier for us? Yeah, possibly so. What if, on my Coffee Cup page, instead of manually putting in the styling for the Dirt link, what if I instead said that that Dirt link is the content for the forward link? Something like that. Back over in my layout file then, where currently inside the body I have a div called content and the yield. What if there I put in a span, gave that span the ID of forward link, bless you, and inside that span I say yield for the forward link. So I basically then would just have that span in this one place in my layout file, and each one of the individual templates could say what should go there, what should go in the forward link spot. I could do basically the same thing for the backlink too, couldn't I? I could put in a yield for the backlink, and then any page that has a backlink, I could just say what the content for it is. So the coffee cup page doesn't have a backlink, so I won't do anything with it. On the dirt page, I'll say content for backlink is coffee. The content for the forward link is happiness. Kind of like that. If I go pull up my dirt page, that looks okay. It looks just like it did before. If I go back to the coffee page, looks good. Forward to dirt, forward to happiness, which I haven't done yet. That seems to get it done. Does that seem like more or less work than what we had before? I think overall maybe it was a little bit more, but I think in the long run it would end up being less. Like, what if I decide that's the main navigation for my page and I want to take those links and I want to put them inside nav tags? Well, instead of having to go put nav tags around them on all of our product pages, I could just do it once right here. I could just say, make this the navigation. If I decided I wanted to do some type of special styling for all the backlinks, instead of having to go to every product page, put a span or a div or something like that around it, I could just do it at one point, one place in my layout. It all seems fine. There are some other little shortcuts that we could potentially put in later that could again make this even easier than it is now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little content for blocks for backlink and forward link from my dirt page. I'm going to paste them into the happiness page, and I'll just change the backlink so the backlink goes back to dirt. And so that the forward link goes forward to laptop. So happiness goes back to dirt, forward to laptop. On the laptop page, I'm only going to put in a backlink. You can't go forward from laptop. So the backlink on the laptop page, I'll say, goes back to happiness. So now forward to happiness, forward to laptop, back to happiness, back to dirt, back to coffee. I can cycle through all my products one at a time, linearly. And it seems okay. Seem okay to you? Does it make sense? There we go. Okay. What's next? Do you have any questions? All right, let's move on then and start talking about helpers. Helpers are kind of a generic term in a way in Rails. Right? There's actually a specific type of code that can be created called a helper. There's a helpers folder that exists here in our hierarchy under app. Right? But the helpers I want to talk about right now are basically a few methods, a handful of methods that Rails makes available to try and make common everyday things that we do inside our Rails apps easier. Kind of what it comes down to. Okay? A few of the examples of these are some of the helper methods that are provided for us for loading our style sheets and our JavaScript files. If I go back and pull up my math layout file, math.html.erb, you can see some of the helpers that are available right up there at the top. A helper method called style sheet link tag, another one called JavaScript Include tag, another one called CSRF meta tags. Let me take those three. I'm going to copy them, and I'm going to put them up at the top of my products layout file. Okay. I'm sure you could probably guess at what the first two of them do. Right? Style sheet link tag, it's given the name application there. Okay. What that essentially causes to happen is it tells Rails that in this view we want to make use of the style sheet called application. Okay. Things at that point, though, get a little bit different. Right? The style sheets themselves, under the app folder, there's an assets folder. And under assets, there's a subfolder called style sheets. Okay. If you look in that style sheets folder, there is a file there called application.css. So all indications seem to be that this style sheet link tag method is saying to load that file, application.css. Okay. But if I come over to my browser and actually take a look at what's being loaded, it is loading application.css, but it's also loading example CSS, math CSS, and product CSS. So it's loading right now a total of 4 different style sheets. Right. This one method call that looks like it's loading just a single style sheet is actually getting all the style sheets that are out there under Asset Style Sheets. Well, how in the world is that happening? Well, the magic is in the application CSS file. The application CSS file is not a regular old CSS file. It's actually a special type of loader file that's used by one of the new parts of Rails called sprockets. Right? You can, if you want to, actually put CSS directly into the application CSS file. Right? But its main role, right, is to load other CSS files. You'll notice there's 2 lines down here. They're probably kind of hard to see. They're gray, and since they're kind of treated as comments, they look like comments. Right? They show up as sort of a dark gray on a dark background. Okay? But those two lines that start with asterisk equal are actually basically load directives. They're indicating that other files should be loaded. The one that says require self is basically saying if there's any CSS in this file, go ahead and apply it, go ahead and use it. And then the next one that starts with asterisk equal says require tree dot. That's saying get all other style sheets that are in the current directory. That one line. So it doesn't matter how many other CSS files we have here in this current directory, that one line is saying load them all. Which is why over in the browser, we end up with all 4 style sheets loaded, the application style sheet plus the other 3. For examples, math and products. That's pretty cool, isn't it? If I've got a website that I've built in Rails, say there's 200 pages, right? Well, we don't have to edit every one of those 200 pages because we have layout files, right? Let's say out of those 200 pages we have 5 different layouts, right? If one day I decide I want to create a new style sheet that I want loaded in every page, right, I don't have to go to my 5 different layout files and put in a line that says link to this new style sheet. All I have to do is create the style sheet and put it in this folder. That's it. If the style sheet file is here, it'll get loaded. It'll automatically make a link tag to it, and that style sheet will be used. Okay? All of that is triggered when we use this style sheet link tag helper method in one of our layout files. Right? It says require application, and application then tells it what other files to load. It's good stuff. Okay? It gets even better though. Okay? What happens is when we're in development mode, okay, it puts in a link tag for every separate style sheet. So I have 4 style sheets right now, so I get 4 link tags in my page. But that behavior is doing that because I'm in development mode. Right? Technically, loading 4 different style sheets is slower than loading one that has the content of all 4 in it. Right? More HTTP requests. More requests have to be sent from the browser to the server and get a response back. Right? If I'm loading 4 style sheets, than if I only had to request 1 and maybe wait a fraction longer for it to download because it's larger. So what would happen here, automatically, without you having to do anything special, is when this site goes into production mode, when you put it out on a real server and it detects that it's in production mode, right, the sprockets library that's being triggered here would automatically take all of your CSS, right, and would automatically combine it all into a single file and would then only put in a single link tag. So it optimizes itself for deployment, essentially. Optimizes itself in production. Kind of a neat little trick. It's very convenient to use, and it does everything it can to be as efficient as possible without making you do all that extra work. Okay? So anyway, any style sheet that's out there we can basically use if we want to. So let's say I wanted to take the CSS that I embedded here at the top of my product page, and instead I wanted to move it to one of those external files. Okay. I'm just going to cut it out of the head section of my products layout file. I'm going to open my file called products.css.scss. And I'm going to paste that in there. If I go and pull up my product pages, you see the CSS still works fine. So it's now just getting it from the external file instead of from the head section. One of the neat things that happens here in these external files is, did you notice the way the file name was set up? Products.css.scss. If you think of the names of the style sheets as being like the names of the templates we were working with, what that file name would indicate is that this style sheet is called products. Right? The output of executing it is going to be CSS code. And the rendering engine, right, the interpreter that's going to execute it is going to be SCSS. Right? Essentially what we have here are not pure CSS files. These are actually SCSS files. And whenever they need to be used, they are compiled into regular CSS. That's what all those comments up there at the top are about. Right? I would encourage you to go look up SCSS, Google it. Right? They've got a URL you can hit right there in those comments too to learn about some of the neat things you can do with SCSS. It's much better than just regular CSS. You can do things like create variables and use them throughout the CSS code. You can write functions, right, that you can use throughout the code. Right? That stuff's all really great and neat. But overall, my absolute favorite thing about it, right, is the fact that you can embed selectors inside other selectors. Remember last week, I was doing things like that. I say for the body, set the background color. For the content div that's in the body, set these 4 attributes. For the forward link that's inside the content that's inside the body, right, float it right. When we were doing the math stuff last week, I was doing that with the tables. I was saying table, tr, td, and I think Justin said, you don't have to do that, do you? And the answer is, yeah, usually you don't, but I do like to be very specific. I don't normally put body in front of everything, right? But I very much do often do things like that, where I would say specifically the thing called forward link that's inside the content div. Right? Well, in SCSS, one of my favorite things about it is that if forward link is inside the content div, I could actually take the selector for forward link and I could put it inside the content div, like that. Right? And it works. It works just fine. SCSS recognizes that. It's much more like programming, where you can embed different scopes inside each other.
On mine, I didn't show up as the different colors on the SCSS file.
As the different colors?
Mine's just all white text.
Are you using TextMate?
Yeah.
Down here at the bottom where you select the language type, do you have CSS selected? Yeah. At some point I told mine whenever I load a file that has an SCSS extension, color-code it as CSS, is what's happened with mine. So it knew to do that. Yours probably just needs to be set, and then it'll do the color coding for you. So anyway, right, SCSS. Something very, very similar to all this happens over on the JavaScript side of things. Right? Sprockets, again, is heavily involved with the loading of JavaScript files. There's a helper function Rails gives us called Javascript Include tag, and again, we're saying include a JavaScript file called application. If we look under the assets folder, there's a JavaScripts folder there. Inside the JavaScripts folder, there is a file called application.js, but there's also 3 other JavaScript files, kind of JavaScript files as well. If I look in the application JavaScript file, it's a very similar situation to what we saw with the CSS. There are some lines that start off with // equal. Those are basically load directives. So there's a line in here that says load jQuery. Right? A nice JavaScript library if you haven't played with it before. There's a load in here, a require that says load jQuery UGS, unobstructive JavaScript. That's basically, in a way, sort of the ties between the JavaScript library and Rails itself. And then there's a line in there that says require tree dot, the current directory. That's the line that actually tells it to load every other JavaScript file that's in the JavaScripts folder. So just like with the CSS, if you want to use a JavaScript file, You don't have to go to every layout and require it and load it. Right? Instead, you just create the JavaScript file, you put it in the JavaScript directory, and it'll get loaded automatically. Sprockets takes care of that for you. Right? The JavaScript files themselves are not pure JavaScript. The file names of them, like this one, for example, is called products.js.coffee. Right? Essentially, what we do in this file is we'd use a language called CoffeeScript, right? Which is sort of an alternative syntax to the traditional JavaScript syntax. It's much cleaner. It's much more Ruby-like. Right? We would write CoffeeScript code. Then whenever that code was needed, it would be compiled. JavaScript is what would then be output. And it's that JavaScript that would then automatically get loaded into the browser to be used. Right? And again, it'll do that little trick, whereas if it's in the browser saying that it's going to load 4 or 5 different JavaScript files, see, it says it's going to load jQuery, jQuery.ujs, examples.js, math.js, products.js, application.js. If we were in production mode, what would happen is it would automatically combine all those JavaScript files together into one, and then download just that one JavaScript file for efficiency's sake, for faster page loading. So it's a neat system. All of these things are things that technically when you build a website you should be doing, but you have to do them by hand and it's a pain, so nobody does. Well, Rails does all of them for us. So we can just kind of sit back and be glad that all that stuff is being taken care of. Right? Whenever we want to make use of it, these 2 helpers basically are all we've got to do. Just make sure in our layout files we're asking it to require our style sheets and require our JavaScripts. And that's about all there is. The last little helper up here in the head section, CSRF meta tags. CSRF is cross-site request forgery. Basically what the idea with that is that if you set up part of your site so that it can accept values from a form, what is to stop somebody else from creating their own web page with a form that maybe has different field names or different options or less restrictions than what you put into your form? What if they create their own form and they have it submit to your site in place of your form? How can your website know that its own forms are what are submitting the data and not somebody else submitting from somewhere else? Right? Well, those CSRF meta tags, basically up here in the head section, puts in a couple of meta tags here that have sort of like code words in them. These weird encrypted sort of values. Oops, sorry. Big, ugly, long strings. And what happens is that Rails knows what strings, what keywords it gives when it does this meta tag. And then anytime a form is submitted, it goes back and it looks for those same keywords. Right? That way it knows whether it's really one of its own forms that are submitting data or whether somebody is trying to forge a submission from somewhere else. Right? It's like our super secret class here. If I wanted to send you around the corner to get me a Coke, but I was afraid you might get captured by an alien, replaced, right? And then the alien would try and come back in. On your way out the door, I could say, this is the code word, and then you have to tell me that code word before I'm going to let you back in again. Same thing here. Right? Rails knows what the code word is, and it's not going to accept data back from a form unless the form also submits the correct code word. That sort of thing. So anyway, that's 3 of the helpers to get us started. Next week, what we'll do is we'll look at some of the helpers that we tend to put in more selectively by hand. There are, for example, helpers to help us write HTML code, helpers for inserting images, helpers for formatting numbers, helpers for writing hyperlinks, helpers for just all manner of different things. We'll dig into those next time. Okay? All right. Were there any last questions I could answer?
Is there a website I can go to get TextMate set up to do what you have yours do, like the doc type?
I don't recall that it was anything too terribly special. Where did I do that? Actually, you know, it seems like the first time I tried to open a file of that type, I think it prompted me. Where does it make that association? Wouldn't be in any of those. I don't know. I'll have to dig around. I will have to dig around. I'll see if I can find them. All right. Okay. Hope you all have a good weekend.